It all unraveled in silence. Not with an explosion, not with a fall from a great height, but with a steady unraveling, thread by thread, word by word, tweet by tweet, until there was nothing left but echoes of a man who once shaped the very sound of a generation. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere quiet. Somewhere between genius and collapse. Between bright lights and the unbearable weight of being seen. This is not a story about fame. It's a story about what it does to the soul. You know the name, Kanye West. Once a symbol of artistic revolution, cultural disruption, and limitless ambition. And then, a man undone not by the world, but by himself. In just 6 months, he burned what had taken decades to build. His influence, his image, his empire. But behind every scandal, there's a silence. And in that silence, there's a story. A human one. A fragile one. As you lie in the stillness of your room, let your mind drift through this tale not as gossip, but as a quiet meditation on brilliance, isolation, and downfall. Because sometimes, what destroys a person isn't one mistake, but a chain of tiny fractures, unseen, until the collapse is too loud to ignore. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this kind of slow, thoughtful storytelling, I'd love it if you gave this video a like. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to join me again for stories best told under the moonlight. And in the comments, tell me, where in the world are you listening from right now? And what time is it on your side of the night? I'm always curious how far these whispers travel, whose dreams they enter. Maybe you're here to relax. Maybe you're here to reflect. Or maybe, like me, you're just looking for something real in the quiet hours. It was October 2022. A cool evening, unassuming at first. But as night fell, something shifted, quietly at first, then all at once. A single tweet. Just a few words. Enough to echo across headlines, shock longtime fans, and send entire corporations scrambling behind the scenes. In the tweet, Kanye West, one of the most celebrated and controversial artists of the 21st century, declared that he was going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. He misspelled it. DEFCON instead of DEFCON, the U.S. military defense readiness scale. But the spelling was irrelevant. What mattered was the intent. And the message was loud, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. In the hours that followed, the world didn't hesitate. Not this time. Not even for someone like him. Twitter locked his account. Instagram restricted him. Brands issued quiet statements behind closed doors. Boardrooms buzzed. Legal teams convened. For years, Kanye had been controversial. Yes. He had said many shocking things. He had worn that red cap. He had interrupted award shows, started feuds, made claims that raised eyebrows. But this was different. Because this wasn't just political. It wasn't just provocative. It was discriminatory. It crossed a line that few public figures can ever return from, especially in an era where hate speech carries not only public outrage, but corporate consequences. For many, this was the moment the spell broke. For years, Kanye had walked a tightrope between genius and chaos, testing how far he could go, how much he could say, and how fiercely his legacy could protect him. He had been forgiven, excused, even admired for his unpredictability. But now people weren't just shaking their heads. They were turning away. And the shift was immediate. Within days, media outlets, some that once hailed his artistry, began to report a different narrative. One less about musical innovation and more about moral failure. Sponsors went silent. Adidas, the crown jewel of his billion-dollar fashion empire, began reviewing their contract. Other collaborators followed. He lost a major deal with Balenciaga. Creative partners distanced themselves. Longtime friends, some of whom had defended him for years, stopped answering questions. The walls were closing in. It's difficult to pinpoint the exact second a public figure crosses the threshold from complicated to condemned. But in Kanye's case, this tweet, this single moment of digital impulse, was the match to a powder keg he'd been building for years. That night, something irreversible happened. And not because people suddenly realized he was flawed. They'd always known that. Kanye's imperfections were part of the mythos. No, the reason this night marked a turning point was because, for the first time, it felt like there was no mask left. No metaphor. No misunderstood poetry. Just words. Harmful words. In black and white. Visible to millions. Without context, apology, or nuance. And in the harsh, flickering light of that tweet, many saw not a visionary, but a man unraveling. The irony, of course, is that Kanye had always spoken about being silenced. About wanting to break free from control, from institutions, from the boundaries of political correctness. But in seeking to tear those walls down, he ended up isolated by the very freedom he had demanded. He was now alone in a room he'd set on fire himself. The next morning, social media was ablaze. Journalists dissected his words. Public figures spoke out. Communities condemned what they heard. And fans, once loyal, once unwavering, began asking questions they never dared to before. Is this who he really is? How long have we been excusing this behavior? Is it finally time to let go? And perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. Was the genius ever real, or were we just hoping? This was the night the world didn't cancel Kanye. It simply stepped away. Not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. From years of trying to separate the art from the artist, the vision from the volatility, the music from the man. That tweet didn't destroy his legacy on its own, but it revealed the cracks in the foundation he'd been standing on for years. And once the world saw them, they couldn't unsee them. That's how it always begins. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. A slow shift. The quiet turning of a tide. And by the time the sun rose, the world wasn't asking if he'd gone. Before the headlines, before the red carpets and flashing cameras, before the controversies and the empire, there was just a boy. A quiet, thoughtful, often intense boy, walking the streets of Chicago, headphones on, heart full of ambition, and something to prove. Kanye Omari West was born on June 8, 1977, in Atlanta, Georgia. But it was Chicago that raised him. His parents divorced when he was just 3, and he moved with his mother, Donda, to the Windy City, a place that would shape his sound, his worldview, and his sense of identity. Donda West was more than just a mother. She was his first believer. An English professor, cultured, articulate, warm. She saw something in her son that extended beyond ordinary talent. She encouraged him to express himself, to question norms, to think deeply and boldly. The values she instilled would later echo through his music and his mistakes. Kanye's early years were marked by a quiet kind of restlessness. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he felt more deeply than most. He began writing poetry at just 5 years old. By the time he was a teenager, music had become his obsession. Not just listening to it, building it. He'd sit for hours, piecing together sounds on borrowed equipment, making beats, layering samples, experimenting with rhythm and texture like a young painter discovering color. Chicago's underground hip-hop scene in the 90s was competitive, raw, and full of grit. And in that environment, young Kanye wasn't the coolest. He didn't dress like the others. He didn't rap like them either. He wasn't trying to imitate. He was trying to innovate. But it wasn't easy. For years he knocked on doors that stayed shut. Producers didn't take him seriously. Labels saw him as a beat maker, not a rapper. He didn't fit the mold, too soft-spoken, too quirky, too intellectual. But there was a fire in him, a quiet certainty that he was meant to be heard. He sold beats to local acts, scrapped together money however he could. And in 2000, he got his break. Rockefeller Records noticed his production work, especially a track called "This Can't Be Life" for Jay-Z. It was unlike anything else on the radio at the time. Soulful, layered, melancholy and bold. Soon after, Kanye became the go-to producer for Rockefeller. He crafted hits for Jay-Z's The Blueprint, one of the most influential albums in hip-hop history. Songs like Izzo HOVA and Take Over bore his signature sound, soul samples chopped into something entirely new. It was revolutionary. His beats didn't just make people dance, they made them feel. They evoked memory, emotion, longing. He was shaping a new language in hip-hop, and everyone knew it. Everyone, except those who still thought he couldn't rap. That was Kanye's frustration. He was behind the curtain, creating magic for other people, yet the spotlight kept passing him by. But what most didn't realize was that Kanye wasn't just quietly waiting for his turn. He was plotting it. He had been recording his own verses for years. He had notebooks full of lyrics, unfinished tracks, self-recorded demos. And when the time came to make his own album, he was ready, not just with talent, but with purpose. Then, in 2002, everything changed. Kanye was in a near-fatal car crash in Los Angeles. He had just left the studio after a long night of work. His jaw was shattered in the accident. For most people, that would have meant silence. But for Kanye, it became a microphone. Just 2 weeks after the crash, he recorded Through the Wire, a track that captured both his physical pain and his unstoppable will to create. He rapped with his jaw still wired shut, his voice muffled, but his message crystal clear. He was here. He had something to say. And he wasn't going to wait for permission. Through the Wire wasn't just a song. It was a declaration of identity, of survival, of arrival. When his debut album The College Dropout was released in 2004, it hit the industry like a thunderclap. Here was a rapper who didn't glamorize violence or materialism. He talked about insecurity, about education, about faith, about being different. And people listened. Because in a world full of noise, Kanye offered something vulnerable and real. The album went on to sell millions. It won multiple Grammys. It turned Kanye West from a background producer into a household name. But more than that, it marked the birth of an artist who was determined to do things his way. He didn't dress like other rappers. He didn't talk like them. He didn't try to fit the mold. And that made him magnetic. In the early 2000s, Kanye West was more than just a success story. He was a disruption, a symbol of creative rebellion. He brought back soul into hip-hop, vulnerability into bravado, and self-awareness into the spotlight. To his fans, he wasn't just making music. He was making statements. And every beat, every verse, every awkward red carpet moment felt like part of a larger narrative. The rise of an outsider who refused to be quiet. This was the Kanye people fell in love with. Not just because of the music, but because he represented possibility. That a kid from Chicago with no connections, no cosigns, and a wired jaw could still rewrite the rules of the game. And he did. For a time. But as we'll soon see, genius doesn't arrive with fireworks. It creeps in quietly, like a shift in the air. One moment, the world sounds familiar, predictable. And then someone steps forward and rearranges the entire landscape. For hip-hop, that moment came in February 2004, when a debut album hit the shelves with a peculiar name: The College Dropout. At first glance, it seemed ironic, almost defiant. An album named after failure? A rapper promoting education by rejecting it? But beneath that title lay something far more nuanced. This wasn't a celebration of ignorance, it was a critique of conformity, of the societal pressure to follow paths that didn't feed the soul. And no one had dared to say it quite like this before. Kanye West didn't just release an album. He dropped a manifesto, wrapped in humor, soul samples, and self-awareness. The College Dropout was a musical and cultural pivot point. Because Kanye wasn't what people expected from a rapper. He wasn't hardened by the streets, or molded by violence. He didn't wear bulletproof vests or boast about criminal pasts. He wore pink polos and backpacks. He talked about self-doubt, spirituality, middle-class frustrations, and working retail jobs. He gave voice to a part of the Black experience that mainstream rap had largely overlooked. The nerd, the artist, the overthinker, the dreamer. And people listened closely. Tracks like All Falls Down, Jesus Walks, and Spaceship didn't just sound different. They felt different. There was conviction in his delivery, but also vulnerability. He wasn't posturing, he was revealing. On All Falls Down, he dissected consumerism, insecurity, and societal pressures with surgical precision. We buy our way out of jail, but we can't buy freedom. On Jesus Walks, he did the unthinkable. He made a Christian-themed anthem that got played in clubs and on hip-hop radio. He openly talked about God, not as a cliché, but as a conflicted seeker trying to reconcile faith with fame. That alone was revolutionary. And then there was Through the Wire, his jaw still healing from that car crash. The beat sampled Shaka Khan's Through the Fire, flipped into a triumphant, bittersweet anthem of survival. It wasn't just autobiographical. It was proof. Proof that pain could be productive. That wounds could sing. Critics were stunned. Audiences were captivated. And fellow artists, well, they were watching closely. Kanye had kicked open a door no one even knew was locked. The College Dropout was an immediate success, both commercially and critically. It debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. It sold over 400,000 copies in its first week. It went on to be certified triple platinum in the US alone. But its true impact wasn't just in numbers. It was in the ripple effect. Suddenly, it was okay for rappers to be reflective, to be emotional, to wear pastel sweaters and rap about heartbreak. The culture shifted. Labels began signing more artists who didn't fit the old archetype. And Kanye stood at the center of that transformation, not just as a musician, but as a movement. And it wasn't just hip-hop that took notice. At the 47th Annual Grammy Awards, The College Dropout earned 10 nominations and won Best Rap Album. Kanye walked that red carpet not just as an underdog, but as a visionary who had made the industry reevaluate its own expectations. Yet, behind all the applause, Kanye wasn't satisfied. In interviews, you could hear it in his voice, the hunger. He wasn't content with being great for a newcomer. He wanted to redefine greatness itself. And that's what made him different. Some artists aimed to impress. Kanye wanted to disrupt. He didn't chase trends, he challenged them. He wasn't asking to be accepted. He was daring the world to keep up. In the years that followed, he would only grow bolder, more ambitious, more polarizing. But it all began here. with a debut album that shattered the mold and redefined what a rapper could be. And perhaps what made the college dropout truly unforgettable was that it wasn't about dominance. It was about honesty. Kanye invited us into his world, not as a performer, but as a person. And for a brief, shining moment, the world leaned in. That album didn't just launch a career. It launched a mindset. A generation of listeners and artists began to see music not just as entertainment, but as expression. Unpolished, unfiltered, and unafraid. It was the making of a genius. But the irony, of course, is that the moment the world began calling him one, was also the moment he began to believe it. Deeply. Fully. Without doubt. And that belief, while powerful, would later become a double-edged sword. Because the genius, when left unguarded, can begin to crack beneath its own brilliance. And fame, relentless, blinding, unyielding, has a way of turning those cracks into fault lines. For Kanye West, the early 2000s were a golden era. His debut had not only stunned the industry, it had earned him a seat among legends. He was hailed as bold, visionary, and refreshingly human. But behind the applause, something more complicated was beginning to surface. The world saw a confident artist. But Kanye, he felt underestimated. Still, even with Grammys on his shelf and platinum plaques on his wall, he sensed resistance. As if the world respected his art, but not him. And when a man starts to feel unseen, even in the spotlight, he speaks louder. The first public rumble came in 2005, at the Live 8 benefit concert in Philadelphia. Kanye performed with his usual energy. But later that summer, something much more jarring happened. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, during a live televised fundraiser, Kanye appeared alongside comedian Mike Myers. The moment began innocently, words of support, calls for donations. But then Kanye went off script. His voice low, his delivery deliberate, he said, "George Bush doesn't care about black people." The camera cut away abruptly, Myers stunned beside him. The room fell into awkward silence. The comment made headlines instantly. It wasn't just controversial, it was unfiltered. A moment of raw emotional outburst that tore through the polished, managed surface of broadcast television. Some praised his courage. Others condemned the lack of decorum. But everyone was watching. And from that moment on, Kanye became more than a rapper. He became a cultural lightning rod. That same year, at the MTV Europe Music Awards, he famously interrupted the acceptance speech for Best Video, an award that had not gone to him. He stormed the stage, declared that his video for Touch the Sky should have won, and left the audience stunned. There were no apologies. Just conviction. It wasn't about the trophy. It was about the principle. At least, that's how he saw it. But for many watching, the question had begun to shift. Was Kanye passionate, or unstable? More incidents followed. Subtle at first. Then louder. He walked out of award shows when he didn't win. He criticized radio hosts and interviewers. He questioned the integrity of award shows, magazines, even fellow artists. Some moments were dismissed as Kanye being Kanye. Others sparked debate about ego, entitlement, and the pressures of fame. But the real shift came in 2009, at the MTV Video Music Awards in New York City. A night that would become one of the most replayed and analyzed moments in pop culture. Taylor Swift had just won Best Female Video for her song, You Belong With Me. She stepped onto the stage, beaming, nervous, barely 20 years old. And then, suddenly, Kanye appeared. He took the microphone from her hand and said, "Yo, Taylor, I'm really happy for you. I'ma let you finish, But Beyoncé had one of the best videos of all time. The crowd gasped. Cameras scrambled. Taylor stood frozen. And in that one moment, part interruption, part protest, Kanye crossed a threshold. What might have once been seen as artistic frustration had now spilled into something else. Something uncomfortable. Public. Disruptive. The backlash was immediate and fierce. He was booed at the venue. Celebrities denounced him. President Obama, off mic during an interview, referred to him with a term we won't repeat here, but one that signaled just how far his image had fallen in a single night. Even longtime fans felt conflicted, because the music still resonated. But the man behind it was beginning to feel unpredictable. In the days that followed, Kanye issued an apology. He appeared on talk shows, expressing regret, even vulnerability. He admitted he'd been drinking that night. He said he didn't handle it well. And for a while, the apology was accepted. But the cracks had widened. And the world had started to wonder. Was this brilliance with a messy edge? Or chaos in disguise? Of course, no artist is a stranger to controversy. Rebellion often walks hand in hand with innovation. But with Kanye, there was something different. His outbursts weren't just about artistry. They were personal, emotional, wounded. He wasn't playing a role. He was revealing himself, raw, unedited, and at times unraveling. And yet, even as the public began to divide, between those who defended his honesty and those who questioned his behavior, his music never lost its power. That was the paradox of Kanye West. He could be deeply disruptive on a Tuesday and drop a masterpiece on a Friday. But disruption takes a toll on relationships, on reputation, and on the self. In hindsight, these were the first signs, not of a villain in the making, but of a man struggling with the weight of expectation, the intensity of genius, and the loneliness that comes from always being slightly out of sync with the world around him. He wasn't spiraling yet, but the ground had started to shift. And as we'll see, that shift would soon be. They say the brightest flames burn the fastest. But some figures in history, rare and enigmatic, managed to survive the fire, and return not as they were, but as something entirely new. Refined. Transformed. Stronger. Stranger. Unforgettable. Kanye West was never meant to follow a straight line. Where others feared detours, he craved them. And each time the world thought it had figured him out, he changed direction. This is, perhaps, one of the most remarkable traits of his career. Not just the ability to bounce back, but to evolve. To use pain, humiliation, and personal loss as raw material for reinvention. By late 2007, Kanye was reeling. Public opinion had begun to shift following his outbursts. But something far more devastating had occurred, something no controversy could compare to. In November of that year, his mother, Kanye West, passed away suddenly following cosmetic surgery complications. It was a loss that shattered him. Donda had been his anchor, his biggest supporter, his emotional compass. In the months that followed, Kanye looked hollow. He still toured. He still smiled on stage. But something in his spirit had cracked. And then came another blow. His longtime fiancée, Alexis Pfeiffer, ended their engagement. The two heartbreaks, so close together, created a perfect emotional storm. He withdrew from the spotlight. Not entirely, but enough that fans noticed the difference. And when he returned, he wasn't rapping. In 2008, Kanye released 808s and Heartbreak. Gone were the lush soul samples and intricate lyricism of his earlier work. In their place, cold, distant beats, auto-tuned vocals, minimalism, emotion. At first, people didn't know what to make of it. A hip-hop icon, singing? The production was stark, almost alien. The melodies were haunting. The lyrics, bleak, confessional, aching. On tracks like Welcome to Heartbreak, Street Lights, and Coldest Winter, Kanye didn't perform as a star. He mourned like a man. He stripped everything down to its emotional core. And for some, it was jarring. They missed the old Kanye, the one with the backpack, the soul samples, the charm. But others understood. They saw a man pushing the boundaries of his genre. A man willing to risk popularity in search of honesty. Critics were divided at first. But over time, 808s and Heartbreak became recognized as one of the most influential albums of the 2000s. It paved the way for artists like Drake, Kid Cudi, Frank Ocean, and The Weeknd, who would build their own empires on the emotional vulnerability Kanye had dared to put into sound. It was bold. It was uncomfortable. It was, undeniably, new. But his greatest reinvention was still ahead. In 2009, following the infamous Taylor Swift incident, Kanye disappeared almost entirely. No interviews. No appearances. Just silence. People whispered that his career might be over. That he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But behind the scenes, he was creating. Far from Los Angeles, far from New York, he retreated to Honolulu, Hawaii, where he set up a studio and began what would become a legendary creative process. He invited collaborators, dozens of them. Rappers, producers, singers. They flew in, stayed for weeks, sometimes months. But there were rules. No phones. No outside distractions. Just focus. Just craft. It was an artistic boot camp, intense, obsessive, meticulous. And in November 2010, after over a year in creative exile, Kanye emerged with an album many would later call his masterpiece. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. From the very first notes of Dark Fantasy, it was clear this was not just a comeback. This was a reclamation of power. A statement. A portrait of chaos, genius, excess, and redemption. Every detail was precise. Every beat, cinematic. Each track, layered, rich, demanding your attention. On power, he wrestled with fame and ego. No one man should have all that power. On Runaway, he offered a toast. Sarcastic, sorrowful, to the mistakes he'd made. It was self-aware, vulnerable, and disarmingly honest. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was owning the complexity. Even the album art was controversial, a surreal, painted image of a distorted figure straddling a mythical creature. Unapologetic. Symbolic. Bold. Critics hailed the album as a triumph. Rolling Stone gave it 5 stars. Pitchfork awarded it a rare 10 out of 10. Time magazine called it an album of grand ambition and stunning execution. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was myth-making. Kanye West had done what few artists in history managed to do. He fell. He disappeared. And he returned, not with apology, but with art so undeniable that even his harshest critics paused. In My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Kanye didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for attention. And he earned it. The album swept year-end lists. It won Grammys. It inspired dissertations. And most importantly, it reminded the world why Kanye West had mattered in the first place. Not because he was perfect, but because he was willing to take risks others wouldn't. To expose parts of himself others buried. To reinvent, rebuild, and reframe his narrative when the world thought it was finished. That's the mark of a true artist. Not just the ability to create, but the courage to be destroyed and create again anyway. By the end of 2010, Kanye West was not just back. He was elevated. But as history has shown us time and again, those who fly too close to the sun often return with scorched. Control is a powerful illusion. In the world of fame, where every move is documented and every word is magnified, true control is almost impossible. But if there was anyone who seemed to defy that truth, it was Kanye West. He didn't just react to fame. He reshaped it, bent it, challenged it, and, for a time, seemed to command it. After the triumph of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Kanye was no longer just a musician. He was a fully formed persona, part artist, part provocateur, part philosopher in designer's shoes. He had figured out something few public figures ever master. If you can't control how people see you, you can control what they talk about. And Kanye gave the world plenty to talk about. He carefully crafted his public image like a sculptor chiseling stone. With a mixture of precision, chaos, vulnerability, and defiance. To some, he was the genius, a man light years ahead of his time. To others, the misunderstood rebel. Provoking discomfort because he saw what others couldn't. And to a devoted few, he was the visionary, a prophet in an industry full of copycats. What made this image so compelling was that it didn't come from a marketing team. It came from him. His interviews, his tweets, his rants on stage. Raw. Unedited. Sometimes incoherent. But always authentic in a way that most celebrities feared to be. Kanye didn't chase approval. He weaponized disapproval. He knew the media needed a spectacle. So he gave them one. He embraced contradiction. One moment, he was comparing himself to Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, and Michelangelo. The next, he was crying on stage, or storming out of interviews. He would praise himself, then sabotage himself. Build the brand, then attack it. It wasn't self-destruction. Not yet. It was a strategy, one built on unpredictability. The more inconsistent he seemed, the more consistent the attention became. And attention, in the digital age, is the ultimate currency. Look closer, and you'll see it wasn't chaos, it was design. He famously declared, "I am Warhol. I am the #1 most impactful artist of our generation." And while some rolled their eyes, others leaned in. Because even when his words felt exaggerated, there was something to them. A sense that he was daring us to imagine a world where an artist wasn't just a performer, but a cultural force. Where music, fashion, technology, and social commentary could all come from the same mouth. Kanye blurred those lines. He launched Yeezy, not just as a sneaker line, but as a fashion empire. Minimalist. Monochrome. Provocative. Much like the man himself. He didn't just release clothes, he presented them. At fashion weeks. In stadiums. Through interpretive dance. He made fashion feel like protest, like performance art. And even when the critics pushed back, calling the designs odd, overpriced, derivative, Kanye smiled. Because he didn't want mass approval. He wanted legacy. He once said, "You may not like me now, but you'll understand me later." It was a statement of ego, yes, but also of long-term vision. He knew that geniuses are rarely embraced in real time. That the world prefers its artists polished and predictable. And Kanye refused to be either. So he leaned into the discomfort. He spoke in riddles. He made bold statements about race, class, creativity, and control. Sometimes he stumbled. Sometimes he said too much. But always he reminded the world that he wasn't just playing the game, he was rewriting the rules. The genius. The misunderstood. The visionary. 3 faces. 1 man. It's worth noting, too, how masterfully he navigated the internet age. In an era where stars were being managed and manicured, Kanye stayed raw. His tweets were chaotic. His interviews went off script. He gave the world a version of himself that was flawed, unfiltered, and alive. And people couldn't look away. They watched, not just because they loved him, but because they didn't know what he would do next. In a way, Kanye became a mirror, reflecting back society's obsession with celebrity, disruption, and authenticity. He wasn't asking for attention. He was the attention. But here's the tragedy in that brilliance. When you build your legacy on unpredictability, eventually, the line between performance and reality begins to blur. And that's the danger. When your persona becomes bigger than your person. When the image you created begins to take control. The myth of control. It's seductive. It tells you that if you move the pieces fast enough, no one will notice the cracks. That if you speak loudly enough, no one will hear the doubt. But control, like fame, is fleeting. And for Kanye, the very persona that elevated him would soon begin to unravel him. But for now, in that stretch between dark fantasy and disaster, he was untouchable. An icon. A myth. There's a hidden toll that comes with visibility. For most people, success brings reward, comfort, admiration, opportunity. But for a certain kind of artist, the ones who shine too brightly, think too deeply, or speak too loudly, success comes with something heavier. An erosion of space, of peace, of self. Kanye West didn't just become famous. He became inescapable. He was in headlines about headlines, on stage, off stage, trending, reposted, dissected, memed. He became the subject of fascination, sometimes admiration, sometimes ridicule. But always in the center. And no human can live in the center forever without starting to lose their edges. Fame began to surround him like a mirrored room. Every action reflected back at him. Every mistake amplified. Every word captured, quoted, twisted, retweeted. He once described it best himself. Everyone wants to know what I'm doing. Everyone wants to use me. Everyone's watching. Always. The dream had become surveillance. As his celebrity grew, his circle began to shrink. People came and went. Some drawn by the gravity of his brilliance, others looking for the spark of his influence. He trusted less. He guarded more. And gradually, the man who once rapped openly about his vulnerabilities began to armor himself with distance. He built walls, literal and metaphorical. You could see it in his homes, minimal, cavernous, almost monastic in their emptiness. You could hear it in his music, cold synths, distorted vocals, lyrics that echoed like shouts from a hollow room. But perhaps nowhere was this change more visible than in his interactions with the media. Kanye had always had a contentious relationship with the press. But by the mid-2010s, it had turned into open warfare. Paparazzi followed him obsessively, cameras in his face at airports, sidewalks, driveways, even while holding his daughter in his arms. He lashed out. Sometimes with words, sometimes just with silence. But the rage, it simmered. He saw the media not as a lens, but as a weapon. A machine that distorted his image. One moment, a musical genius. The next, a walking headline. And the headlines never stopped. There were outbursts during concerts. There were tweets, often cryptic, sometimes poetic, sometimes bewildering. There were interviews where he seemed either far ahead of the conversation or detached from it entirely. And with each eruption, the perception shifted. What once seemed like artistic boldness began to resemble instability. What once felt like genius started to feel fragile. Yet behind that public volatility, one truth remained constant. Kanye was alone in ways few could understand. Fame had turned his life into a stage, but taken away the quiet backstage. He couldn't walk into a store without bodyguards. He couldn't ride a bike without headlines. He couldn't fail, change his mind, or even think aloud without it becoming global news. Even love, something private for most, became a performance. His marriage to Kim Kardashian was iconic, glamorous, scrutinized. Together, they were one of the most visible couples on earth. But visibility isn't intimacy. And slowly, the cracks began to show. In public, he smiled. In music, he roared. In interviews, he proclaimed himself free. But isolation doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like someone talking to themselves louder and louder, because no one is really listening anymore. And perhaps, that's what Kanye feared most. Not being hated, but being misunderstood. And in a world of 24-hour headlines and out-of-context quotes, misunderstanding had become the norm. Even his greatest strength, his ego, began to turn against him. The ego that once helped him defy the odds, break through rejection, and fight for his vision, now began to blind him to the need for stillness, to rest, to reflect. He was in motion constantly. New music, new fashion lines, new declarations, each more urgent than the last. But motion is not the same as progress. And deep down, the signs of fatigue were setting in. He cancelled concerts mid-tour. He made erratic statements on stage. He disappeared from public view, only to return days later with something grand, or something strange. And the world kept watching. Not with concern necessarily, but with curiosity. That's the cruel nature of celebrity. The very people who elevate you are often the ones who keep you spinning. By now, Kanye had become more than an artist. He was a symbol of innovation, of rebellion, of genius, yes, but also of what happens when someone tries to carry the world's attention on their shoulders without ever putting it down. And so the isolation deepened. Surrounded by people, but alone. Heard by millions, but understood by few. Admired by many, but trusted by almost no one. He was still standing, still creating, still insisting on his vision. But behind that determination was a man inching closer to the edge. And the edge, as we'll soon see, was not met. Some unions are made quietly, behind closed doors, between private people in private places. And some are built in the brightest spotlight the modern world can produce. When Kanye West and Kim Kardashian came together, it wasn't just a romance. It was an event. Two titans of pop culture, each already a universe unto themselves, forming something bigger than either had ever been alone. And from the very beginning, it didn't feel like a typical celebrity relationship. It felt mythic, like the merging of two dynasties in the age of algorithms. To understand the power of Kimmy, as they would soon be called, you have to understand who they were before they met. Kim Kardashian was already one of the most famous women in the world. Reality TV icon, beauty mogul, social media powerhouse. A woman who had redefined fame not through movies or music, but through presence. Omnipresent. Meticulously curated. A symbol of aspiration, glamour, and calculated vulnerability. Kanye, on the other hand, was still the unpredictable artist. A man of contradictions, equal parts fire and brilliance, ego and vision. When their worlds collided, it created a cultural fusion unlike anything we'd seen before. They had met years earlier, as friends. But it wasn't until 2012 that they publicly began dating. And almost instantly, the media frenzy ignited. The rapper and the reality star. The visionary and the influencer. To some, it was a perfect match. To others, a spectacle. But behind the spectacle, there was something surprisingly sincere. Kanye often spoke of Kim not just as a partner, but as a muse. He praised her beauty, yes, but also her discipline, her strength, her understanding of the spotlight. He once said, "She gave me everything. She gave me a family. She gave me stability." And in return, he gave her a new kind of legitimacy in the fashion world. He helped rebrand her from reality TV fame to high fashion icon. Introducing her to designers, reshaping her image, guiding red carpet appearances with the precision of an art director. Together, they became the look. Vogue covers, Met Gala appearances, minimalist luxury, monochrome matching, the kind of stylized intimacy that defined an era of influencer culture. And their brand, Kimmy, became a phenomenon. They weren't just partners. They were a business, a mood board, a cultural shorthand for modern love in the age of visibility. Every moment was documented. Pregnancies, birthdays, vacations. Not just through tabloids, but through their own platforms. Instagram, Twitter, magazine spreads. They weren't escaping the spotlight, they were directing it. In 2014, they were married in Florence, Italy. The wedding was lavish, cinematic, global news. From private jets to Givenchy gowns, the event was designed for maximum resonance. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a moment in history, one tailored for digital memory. They had 4 children together. North, Saint, Chicago, Psalm. Each name deliberate. Each child instantly iconic. And for a while, it seemed Kanye had found something rare. A place to land, a family, a partner who understood the pressures of fame, because she lived them too. But the pressures never went away. In fact, they magnified. With Kim came a new level of exposure. Their lives became not just public, but serialized. Every argument, every outfit, every tweet, consumed, analyzed, and reinterpreted through the lens of pop culture. Kanye, who once raged against media scrutiny, now found himself part of one of the most watched families in the world. And that brought tension. Because while Kim had mastered the art of soft-spoken control, curating chaos into elegance, Kanye thrived in disruption. He didn't want to control the narrative. He wanted to explode it. As time passed, the differences in how they handled fame became clearer. Kim kept her brand stable, consistent, calm. Kanye veered towards spontaneity, volatility, reinvention. And though their love remained evident, the cracks began to show. He would disappear for days, lost in creative projects or personal spirals. She would continue filming, posting, managing an empire built on predictability. They were both brilliant at what they did, but their brilliance pulled in opposite directions. Still, it's important to say, this was not a tabloid romance. It was real. You could see it in the way he spoke about her, even when they were apart. In the way she defended him, even at his most chaotic. They believed in each other. Deeply. But sometimes belief isn't enough. Especially when the outside world never gives you a moment to breathe. By 2020, the foundation had begun to shake. Kanye launched a controversial presidential campaign. He made public statements about their family. He tweeted, deleted, reappeared, disappeared again. And Kim, always poised, posted cryptic messages of support. She asked the public for compassion. She alluded to mental health. She tried, perhaps, to shield him from the storm. But some storms can't be shielded. And by early 2021, it was over. Kim filed for divorce. And just like that, Kimmy became past tense. The breakup wasn't loud. There were no vicious public battles. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something so powerful had run its course. And maybe that's the most human part of their story. Not the fame, not the fashion, but the fact that two people tried, really tried, to make love work in a place where love is almost impossible to protect. The Kardashian chapter of Kanye's life was many things. A romance, a brand, a collision of culture and commerce. But most of all, it was a reflection of the world he built around himself. A world of extreme visibility, of curated perfection, of passion and pressure and performance. And when it ended, what remained was a man even more exposed than before. In the grand theater of celebrity, where gods are often made and unmade in equal measure, few artists have embraced the role of Messiah as fully, and as controversially, as Kanye West. It was a transformation that unfolded slowly, then with sudden intensity, a spiritual journey crossing the boundary from entertainer to prophet, from creator to cultural phenomenon. By the time 2013 arrived, Kanye's artistry had already carved deep marks across music and fashion, but his next phase would push boundaries in a way few anticipated. That year, he released Yeezus, an album as stark and confrontational as its title suggested. Gone were the lush orchestrations and soaring melodies of previous works. In their place, harsh industrial beats, abrasive synths, and raw vocal distortions. The sound was jarring, unsettling, an oral rebellion that mirrored the tumult within Kanye himself. On tracks like, "I am a god," he declared. "I am a god, so hurry up with my damn massage." The lyrics shocked listeners, blending blasphemy and bravado with a chilling confidence. Was this arrogance? Or a deeper call? The album peeled back layers of Kanye's psyche, revealing a man wrestling with divinity and despair, power and vulnerability. His public persona began reflecting this messianic self-image. He spoke openly about visions and spiritual awakenings. In interviews and speeches, he compared himself to figures like Jesus and Moses, claiming a mission to save not just music, but culture itself. This wasn't mere theatrics. It was a serious, if complex, belief. Then came Sunday service, a weekly gathering that defied genre or convention. Part concert, part church service, part communal experience. Starting in 2019, Kanye led choirs and musicians in performing gospel-inspired renditions of his songs, along with classic hymns, all bathed in ethereal light and profound energy. Sunday's service became a cultural phenomenon. Celebrities, fans, and curious onlookers gathered, some seeking spiritual renewal, others drawn by spectacle. It was a paradox, both deeply personal and massively public. A space where Kanye's religious devotion intertwined with his performance art. He wore robes, led prayers, and preached messages of redemption and transformation. Through Sunday service, Kanye sought not just to entertain, but to heal. To build a new community, one rooted in faith, music, and shared experience. Yet, as with much of his career, this emergence carried contradictions. Some embraced it as a genuine spiritual awakening. Others saw it as another expression of ego, another performance crafted for attention. But in the context of his journey, it felt like a necessary evolution. For a man who had battled fame, mental health, and public scrutiny, faith became both refuge and stage. It was the next chapter in a life lived loudly and without apology. Kanye West, the genius, the provocateur, now stood as a modern-day mystic, a man who believed he was called to lead, to challenge, to inspire. And in doing so, he reminded us all of the thin line between vision and madness, between divinity and humanity. Because sometimes, the greatest artists don't just create art, they become their own mythology. Few artists manage to transcend their initial craft and evolve into true business titans. Kanye West is one such figure, transforming from a groundbreaking musician into a mogul with an empire spanning fashion, footwear, and beyond. The journey from beatmaker to billionaire was not instantaneous. It was a calculated evolution, marked by vision, persistence, and the ability to seize cultural moments. Long before the public took notice, Kanye harbored ambitions beyond the studio. He saw fashion as a form of expression as vital as music, an extension of identity and artistry. His first major leap came with the launch of Yeezy, a brand that began humbly with sneakers but grew into a global phenomenon. Partnering with Adidas in 2015 was a masterstroke. The Yeezy Boost sneaker line combined cutting-edge design with street culture, creating products that quickly became coveted worldwide. Limited releases sparked frenzies, resale markets exploded, and the brand transcended mere shoes to become status symbols. This success was not luck. Kanye's insistence on creative control and his willingness to disrupt traditional fashion norms set Yeezy apart. He challenged conventions, releasing muted color palettes, oversized silhouettes, and minimalist designs that contrasted sharply with flashy streetwear trends. His approach was both avant-garde and accessible, appealing to fashion insiders and everyday consumers alike. But Kanye's ambitions did not stop there. In 2020, he inked a deal with Gap, one of America's most iconic retailers, to create a new line, Yeezy Gap. The partnership promised to bring his unique vision to a broader audience at more affordable prices, blending high fashion with mass market appeal. It was a bold move, attempting to democratize his style while expanding his influence. Though the launch faced challenges, including delays and production issues, the collaboration underscored Kanye's persistence in reshaping the fashion industry on his own terms. Beyond fashion and footwear, Kanye's business ventures extended into technology and media, including plans for content creation and innovative platforms. He sought to build an empire not confined to one category, but one that reflected the multifaceted nature of his creativity. By the early 2020s, Kanye's financial success was undeniable. His net worth, boosted by Yeezy's soaring valuations and lucrative partnerships, vaulted him into billionaire status, a milestone few artists achieve. But more than wealth, Kanye's true achievement was influence. He redefined what it meant to be a modern artist entrepreneur. He showed that music could be the foundation for a vast cultural ecosystem, one that blends art, commerce, and personal branding. However, this rise was not without controversy. His outspoken nature, unpredictable behavior, and complex public persona sometimes cast shadows over his business dealings. Yet, in the volatile world of celebrity entrepreneurship, Kanye's story remains a testament to vision and resilience. He built a legacy not only through his albums but through a sprawling business empire that challenges the boundaries of art and commerce. Kanye West's transformation from music icon to billionaire businessman is a study in ambition, risk, and the power of relentless self-belief. It's a reminder that in today's world, success requires more than talent. It demands vision, adaptability, and the courage to reinvent oneself. And through it all, Kanye continues to captivate us. In the labyrinth of fame, where every choice reverberates far beyond intention, Kanye West's foray into politics marked a pivotal tumultuous chapter in his life, a spiral that would both captivate and confound the public like never before. By the late 2010s, Kanye's cultural presence was already vast and complex. But in 2018, when he publicly donned the iconic red Make America Great Again hat, the world's gaze shifted from his music and fashion to his politics, and the ripple effect was immediate and profound. The MAGA hat was more than a fashion statement, it was a symbol, loaded with political meaning and cultural weight. For many, it was a sign of allegiance to a deeply divisive figure, Donald Trump. For Kanye, it was a declaration, bold, provocative, and deeply personal. He spoke openly about meeting Trump at the White House, praising the then-president for what he called a willingness to break the mold and challenge the status quo. Kanye framed his support as an act of independent thought, a rejection of the conventional expectations placed upon him as a black artist. He said, "I love Donald Trump," with unfiltered conviction, challenging what he perceived as political tribalism. But this alignment unleashed a storm. Fans, critics, and media outlets responded with shock, confusion, and often fierce criticism. Kanye was no longer just a musical innovator or fashion mogul. He was now a lightning rod in a polarized political landscape. His image fractured. Supporters praised his courage to speak his mind. Detractors accused him of betraying community and values. Some questioned his mental health. Others saw his actions as calculated provocations. The MAGA hat became a symbol of division, both within Kanye's fanbase and the broader public discourse. His political stance did not exist in isolation. In 2020, Kanye took his political ambitions further, announcing a run for the U.S. presidency. His campaign was unconventional to say the least. With limited infrastructure, sporadic rallies, and unpredictable statements, Kanye's bid defied traditional politics. He spoke about faith, freedom, mental health, and racial reconciliation. He shared personal struggles and grand visions for America's future. Yet, the campaign was met with skepticism and concern. Was it a genuine effort? A performance art piece? A cry for help? Regardless, it kept Kanye in the headlines, not for his art, but for his political persona. This chapter deepened the polarization around him. Social media exploded with debates, memes, and heated commentary. Brands, fans, and media wrestled with how to engage, or disengage, from the man who had once been a unifying cultural force. Through it all, Kanye remained unapologetically himself. He embraced controversy as part of his identity, refusing to soften or retreat. But the cost was clear. His public image, once primarily tied to music and fashion, became inseparable from political controversy. He had become a symbol of the era's fractious divides, a figure both celebrated and vilified. And perhaps this was the most striking lesson of all. In today's hyper-connected world, an artist's political choices are as much a part of their legacy as their creative work. For Kanye West, the political spiral was not just about policy or allegiance. It was a mirror reflecting the complexities of fame, identity, and the power of voice. It was a chapter that would forever. The year 2020 was a crucible, a moment when many worlds shifted, but for Kanye West, it became a public reckoning unlike any before. It began with an announcement that stunned the world. Kanye was running for president of the United States. This declaration was bold, unexpected, and for many, bewildering. On July 4th, amid a country grappling with a pandemic, social unrest, and political upheaval, Kanye stepped onto the national stage not as a musician or designer, but as a candidate. His campaign was anything but conventional. From the outset, it was marked by disorganized rallies, erratic speeches, and statements that left many scratching their heads. He spoke about faith, freedom, and family, intertwining personal anecdotes with grand visions for America. But it was his rawness, unfiltered and unpolished, that drew both sympathy and concern. One rally in South Carolina became emblematic of this moment. During an emotional speech, Kanye revealed deeply personal details about his fears of being controlled by others, his struggles with bipolar disorder, and his complex relationship with family. He spoke of nearly aborting his first child, a revelation that stunned listeners and sparked widespread conversation. The media coverage was intense, often portraying him as a man unraveling in real time. Social media exploded with memes, debates, and heartfelt messages from fans and critics alike. But beneath the spectacle was a more profound reality. Kanye was wrestling publicly with his mental health. His openness about bipolar disorder and the challenges it brought into his life marked a turning point in the conversation around mental illness and celebrity. It's a conversation filled with contradictions, admiration for his vulnerability, discomfort with his unpredictable behavior, and compassion for the human beneath the headlines. Throughout 2020, Kanye's mental health struggles were no secret. His tweets oscillated between inspiration and confusion. His public appearances were sporadic and unpredictable. And while some dismissed his behavior as erratic or attention-seeking, others urged the world to approach his story with empathy and understanding. The breakdown was not a single event but a series of moments. A slow unraveling played out on the world stage. It exposed the fragility behind the genius, the human behind the icon, and the cost of living a life under relentless scrutiny. Kanye's 2020 campaign ultimately did not secure a significant share of the vote, but its impact extended far beyond politics. It forced a reckoning, within Kanye, within his family, and within the public consciousness, about the intersections of fame, mental health, and identity. It challenged us to question how we perceive mental illness, especially in those who appear larger than life. And it reminded us that behind every headline, every viral moment, there is a person striving to hold themselves together in a complex, demanding world. In the end, the 2020 breakdown was a moment of profound vulnerability. A man once seen as invincible laid bare in all his complexity. It was a chapter of struggle, but also of courage, a reminder that even those who seem untouchable are human. In the world of fame, relationships can be fragile. Alliances are made under the glare of spotlights, and sometimes they dissolve just as publicly. For Kanye West, this truth played out vividly as personal and professional bridges burned before millions could witness. Kanye was never one to shy away from conflict. His nature, bold, unfiltered, fiercely independent, meant that when tensions arose, they were rarely contained behind closed doors. One of the most notable ruptures was with Jay-Z, once a close friend, collaborator, and mentor figure. Their relationship had been monumental, a pairing that shaped modern hip-hop culture. Together, they had crafted albums, toured arenas, and built a legacy. But over time, cracks appeared. Rumors swirled of creative disagreements, personal grievances, and competitive tensions. Kanye's public comments hinted at betrayal and disappointment, painting a complex portrait of friendship strained by fame and ego. Similarly, Kanye's feud with Drake unfolded like a high-stakes drama. The two giants of music exchanged subtle diss tracks and social media jabs, fueling fan speculation and media frenzy. While rivalry is nothing new in the industry, Kanye's approach was unrelenting, unafraid to escalate conflicts in the public eye. These battles were more than just celebrity spats. They reflected deeper struggles over legacy, respect, and control. On the corporate front, Kanye's relationship with Adidas, once heralded as a landmark partnership, also faced turbulence. Though Yeezy's success was undeniable, reports emerged of frustrations over creative control and business decisions. His outspoken nature and demands for autonomy occasionally clashed with corporate structures. Rumors of strained negotiations and potential split talks circulated, feeding narratives of a visionary at odds with the machinery supporting him. Even within his own creative circle, tensions flared. Collaborators who once praised his genius sometimes found themselves caught in the crossfire of Kanye's moods or declarations. The very passion that fueled his art also sparked volatile outbursts, sometimes alienating those closest to him. All these public conflicts had consequences. Friends became foes, partnerships dissolved, and trust frayed. Yet, paradoxically, Kanye's willingness to burn bridges also underscored his uncompromising commitment to his vision. He chose authenticity, even at the cost of alienation, over comfort or diplomacy. This pattern of public ruptures painted a portrait of a man both brilliant and turbulent. Someone who could inspire greatness, yet unsettle those around him. It was a double-edged sword, because in the glare of fame, burning bridges can sometimes be the only way to keep moving forward. But it also leaves behind a trail of isolation. And in the ever-unfolding saga of Kanye West, few moments were as incendiary, or as polarizing, as the day he stepped onto a public stage wearing a simple yet profoundly provocative piece of clothing, a shirt emblazoned with the phrase, "White Lives Matter." To understand the gravity of this moment, we must first understand the backdrop against which it unfolded. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, the United States, and indeed the world, was gripped by an intense and often painful reckoning on race, justice, and identity. The Black Lives Matter movement had become a powerful global force, shining a harsh light on systemic racism and police violence. For many, it was not just a slogan but a call to action, a demand for equality and recognition. Against this fraught landscape, Kanye's decision to wear a shirt proclaiming, "White Lives Matter," at a public event sent shockwaves through media outlets, fans, critics, and cultural commentators. At face value, the phrase seemed to directly challenge the core message of Black Lives Matter, a movement dedicated to highlighting the struggles and injustices faced by Black communities. For many, the shirt felt like a provocation, a deliberate act to disrupt a conversation about racial justice that had been long overdue. Kanye's choice was not a quiet statement but a thunderclap, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable questions about race, identity, and intention. The reaction was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with outrage, confusion, and heated debate. Some accused Kanye of undermining the Black Lives Matter movement, of trivializing the struggles it sought to address. Others defended him, arguing that he was speaking to the complexity of racial discourse in America, challenging simplified narratives, and urging a broader conversation. The press coverage was relentless. News outlets dissected the moment from every angle, scrutinizing Kanye's past statements, mental health, and political leanings. Celebrities and activists weighed in, many condemning the shirt as tone-deaf or harmful. Yet, as with much of Kanye's public life, the story was layered and complex. Kanye himself explained that the shirt was part of a broader artistic and cultural statement, one meant to challenge, provoke thought, and push boundaries. But no matter the intention, the impact was undeniable. For many, the "White Lives Matter" shirt became a symbol of Kanye's deepening estrangement from his earlier fanbase, and an illustration of how his public image had become increasingly controversial. It highlighted the fine line Kanye walked between fearless expression and alienation. This moment was not just about a piece of clothing. It was about the power of symbols in a divided society. It was about how a single act can ignite fierce debate over identity, politics, and cultural meaning. And it served as a stark reminder that in the age of social media, every gesture is magnified, every statement a lightning rod. For Kanye, it was a moment that crystallized the complex, often contradictory figure he had become. An artist who refuses to be boxed in, even if it means sparking outrage. A provocateur who challenges the world to think differently, though sometimes at great personal and professional cost. And the world watched, listened, and reacted, reminded once again that Kanye West's story. In the complex and often volatile narrative of Kanye West, few chapters have been as consequential, or as widely condemned, as the episode marked by his anti-Semitic remarks. This moment did not merely stir controversy. It unleashed a cascade of repercussions that reshaped the trajectory of his career and public standing in profound ways. To fully grasp the weight of this incident, we must first acknowledge the broader cultural and historical context. Antisemitism, a deeply entrenched prejudice with a painful legacy, has no place in civilized discourse. When public figures make statements that perpetuate harmful stereotypes or hateful rhetoric, the fallout can be swift and severe, both ethically and professionally. In this light, Kanye's remarks represented more than just a personal misstep. They were seen as a dangerous perpetuation of damaging myths and prejudices. Kanye's comments, made publicly on various platforms, were widely interpreted as anti-Semitic. He referenced conspiratorial ideas tied to Jewish control and influence, topics that have been historically weaponized to marginalize and persecute Jewish communities worldwide. The response was immediate and decisive. Major corporations, brands, and collaborators severed ties almost overnight. The once thriving partnership with Adidas was suspended, signaling a dramatic shift in the business alliances Kanye had painstakingly built over years. Other companies followed suit, distancing themselves not only to protect their brands, but also to take a stand against hate speech. The ripple effects were not limited to the corporate world. Fans, fellow artists, and the general public expressed disappointment, anger, and condemnation. Kanye's reputation, already complicated by previous controversies, suffered a significant blow. His artistic achievements were overshadowed by this chapter. His voice, once celebrated for creativity and innovation, now questioned for judgment and responsibility. Yet, it's crucial to understand that the consequences extended beyond immediate backlash. This moment sparked a broader conversation about accountability in celebrity culture. What responsibility do influential figures have when their words reach millions? How should society balance artistic freedom with the impact of harmful speech? For Kanye, the anti-Semitic remarks were a turning point, a public reckoning with the limits of expression and the real-world effects of rhetoric. The episode also highlighted the fragility of fame. No amount of talent or previous success can fully shield someone from the consequences of crossing societal boundaries. While Kanye later issued statements attempting to clarify or retract his words, the damage had been done. The trust of partners, fans, and the broader community was fractured. This chapter of his story is a sobering example of how power, when wielded irresponsibly, can alienate and isolate. It serves as a cautionary tale about the intersection of influence and ethics, a reminder that public figures must navigate their platforms with care, awareness, and respect. In the end, the anti-Semitic remarks were more than a moment of controversy. They were a defining episode that reshaped Kanye West's place in culture, marking a fall from. In the high-stakes world of celebrity, success can feel like walking a tightrope. One misstep, and the fall can be swift and unforgiving. For Kanye West, the fallout that began in the aftermath of his controversial remarks marked one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in recent entertainment history. Once hailed as a visionary who had built an empire spanning music, fashion, and business, Kanye found himself suddenly isolated from key partners and institutions that had propelled his rise. The first and most devastating blow came from Adidas, the company behind the wildly successful Yeezy sneaker line. In response to the growing backlash, Adidas announced the suspension of their partnership with Kanye. This move was more than symbolic. It effectively cut off the revenue stream from one of Kanye's most lucrative ventures, dealing a significant financial shock to his empire. Not long after, other corporate giants followed suit. Gap, which had been collaborating with Kanye on the Yeezy Gap line, distanced itself, halting upcoming projects and partnerships. Luxury fashion house Balenciaga, another brand with which Kanye had cultivated ties, also moved to sever connections. Even more critically, Kanye's network of agents, managers, and financial institutions began to retreat. Agencies once eager to champion his career found themselves stepping back amid mounting controversy and risk. Banks and lenders, wary of the instability, tightened their grip or withdrew support altogether. This cascade of departures wasn't just a business setback, it was a public unraveling. Media outlets reported extensively on the disintegration of Kanye's professional network, framing it as the collapse of a cultural titan. Headlines chronicled the severing of ties, the loss of sponsorships, and the looming financial consequences. For a man whose image had long been intertwined with success and power, the spectacle of decline was stark. But the fallout wasn't just about dollars and contracts. It exposed the fragile nature of celebrity business ventures in an age where public opinion can shift overnight. Kanye's empire, built on creativity and charisma, was vulnerable to the volatility of reputation. His outspoken and controversial actions, once overlooked or forgiven as eccentricity, had become liabilities. Financially, the consequences were severe. Without Adidas's backing, projections estimated a massive loss of income, millions, if not billions, over time. This disruption threatened not only Kanye's wealth but also the jobs and livelihoods of those connected to his brands. Socially, the fallout deepened Kanye's isolation. Former allies grew cautious. Industry doors that had once swung wide began to close. In the court of public opinion, trust eroded. Fans questioned their support, sponsors reconsidered investments, and cultural commentators debated the meaning of redemption. Yet within this collapse lay a stark lesson about the modern entertainment landscape. Success is rarely permanent. It demands constant navigation of public sentiment, corporate interests, and personal conduct. Kanye's descent from celebrated mogul to pariah underscores the delicate balance between creative genius and public responsibility. The fallout that began in this period did not just dismantle a business empire. It shattered a carefully crafted persona and forced a reckoning with the consequences of unchecked controversy. As Kanye faced this storm, it became clear that the road ahead would be defined not just by wealth or fame, but by the struggle to rebuild trust and in the intricate tapestry of celebrity, reputation is both the most fragile and most valuable thread. For Kanye West, a man who once stood as a towering cultural icon, an innovator, a visionary, a trendsetter, the collapse of his reputation was as swift as it was seismic. For years, Kanye had been celebrated for pushing boundaries. From redefining hip-hop to revolutionizing fashion, his name became synonymous with creativity and audacity. He was lauded as a genius who dared to challenge norms, a trailblazer unafraid of bold statements or unconventional paths. But the very traits that elevated him also sowed the seeds of his downfall. As controversies mounted, political entanglements, public breakdowns, polarizing statements, public perception began to shift. No longer was Kanye simply the cultural innovator. Increasingly, he became seen as a figure defined by turmoil and unpredictability. The transformation was neither overnight nor accidental. It was a gradual rewriting of narrative, shaped by media coverage, public discourse, and Kanye's own actions. Headlines that once praised his albums and fashion lines began to highlight his missteps and controversies. Social media amplified every statement, every tweet, every appearance, often in unforgiving detail. In this new light, Kanye's eccentricities were no longer charming quirks but red flags. His outspoken nature became associated with instability rather than brilliance. His moments of vulnerability were sometimes dismissed as erratic or attention-seeking. This shift was complicated by the cultural context. As conversations about mental health, accountability, and social responsibility grew louder, the public became less tolerant of celebrities whose behavior was perceived as harmful or divisive. Kanye's repeated entanglements with controversy made it difficult for many to separate the artist from the spectacle. Brands and business partners responded accordingly, distancing themselves to protect their own reputations. Fans found themselves conflicted, torn between admiration for his artistic legacy and disappointment in his personal conduct. The collapse of Kanye's reputation was a multifaceted phenomenon. It was about lost trust and fractured relationships. It was about the power of media to reshape stories and redefine legacies. And it was about the consequences of living life at such a relentless public pace, with every action scrutinized and judged. Yet, even amid this downfall, Kanye remained a figure of fascination. His story served as a potent reminder of the thin line between genius and controversy, of how fame can elevate and destroy, and of how the public's perception can shift, rewriting the legacy of even the most iconic figures. The collapse of Kanye's reputation is not just a tale of decline. It's a complex narrative about identity, power, and the challenges of navigating the spotlight in a world that demands perfection yet thrives on spectacle. For Kanye West, the journey from cultural icon to controversial figure is a chapter rich with lessons about fame, responsibility, and the fragile nature of legacy. In the aftermath of controversy and public fallout, the narrative often shifts from destruction to the fragile, complicated dance of redemption, or at least, attempted redemption. For Kanye West, this chapter of his story is marked by a series of statements, interviews, and public appearances where he sought to explain, defend, and sometimes contradict his own actions. Navigating the court of public opinion is a delicate art, and Kanye's approach has been as unpredictable as his career. Following the backlash over his remarks and behavior, Kanye stepped forward to offer his perspective. In interviews, he expressed regret over certain statements, acknowledging the pain they caused, while simultaneously doubling down on his right to speak freely. He framed his controversial moments as part of a larger mission, a misunderstood visionary challenging societal norms. Kanye's defenses often invoke themes of mental health, creativity, and spiritual awakening. He portrayed himself as a flawed but sincere individual, wrestling with inner demons while striving to push boundaries in art and culture. In conversations with journalists, he painted a picture of a man seeking understanding rather than condemnation. Yet, the contradictions were unmistakable. At times, Kanye's statements seemed at odds, apologies intertwined with provocations, clarity shadowed by confusion. This duality reflected the complexity of his public persona, where vulnerability and bravado coexist uneasily. Fans and critics alike grappled with these mixed messages. Some found sincerity in his attempts to make amends and embrace growth. Others perceived the efforts as insufficient, or worse, as a deflection from accountability. This tension underscores a universal challenge faced by public figures attempting redemption. How much is enough? Can genuine change overcome past harms? And how does one balance self-expression with responsibility? Kanye's story is a case study in these questions. His attempts at justification reveal the human struggle to reconcile personal truth with public impact. They expose the difficulty of untangling intention from consequence, and of healing in the glare of relentless scrutiny. Moreover, Kanye's efforts often blurred the line between genuine redemption and strategic image management. His returns to the public eye, whether through music, fashion, or media, carried an undercurrent of seeking not only forgiveness but also relevance. This dynamic fueled ongoing debate about the authenticity of his transformation. In the grand narrative of Kanye West, these attempts at redemption and justification are either wholly successful nor entirely futile. They are instead a messy, ongoing process, one marked by contradictions, challenges, and the ever-present hope for renewal. Ultimately, this chapter invites us to reflect on the complexities of forgiveness, the price of fame, and the enduring human desire to be understood despite our flaws. In the wake of controversy and shifting reputations, society often finds itself grappling with a profound question, one that echoes far beyond Kanye West and touches the very heart of how we engage with culture. Can we separate the artist from their art? This dilemma is neither new nor simple. Throughout history, audiences have wrestled with the challenge of appreciating creative works while confronting the personal flaws, missteps, or even crimes of their creators. Kanye West's story brings this conversation into sharp focus, forcing a reckoning with the complexities of fandom, morality, and cultural consumption. On one hand, Kanye's artistic contributions are undeniable. His music redefined hip-hop, pushing boundaries with innovative production, poetic vulnerability, and bold experimentation. Albums like The College Dropout, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and Yeezus have left an indelible mark on music and culture worldwide. His influence extends beyond sound, into fashion, design, and the way artists engage with fame and identity. For many, his art remains powerful, resonant, and inspiring. Yet, on the other hand, Kanye's personal controversies, public breakdowns, divisive statements, and actions seen by some as harmful, pose difficult ethical questions. Can one celebrate the genius of a creator who has also caused pain or spread hurtful ideas? Is it possible to appreciate the beauty of an album while condemning the words or actions of the person behind it? These questions divide audiences. Some argue for a strict separation. Art exists independently, to be judged on its own merits. They claim that creativity transcends the flaws of its creator, and that denying art because of the artist's failings risks censorship and cultural impoverishment. Others insist that art and artists are inseparable, that consuming a creator's work without accountability perpetuates harm and enables problematic behavior. This camp calls for conscious choices, supporting ethical creators, and refusing to ignore the impact of a person's actions beyond their art. In the case of Kanye, this debate is particularly charged. His persona is entwined with his work, his music often autobiographical, his fashion statements extensions of his identity. To separate one from the other is to engage in a nuanced, sometimes uncomfortable mental exercise. Moreover, the rise of social media and instant communication has intensified this dilemma. Fans and critics alike wrestle publicly with their feelings, tweeting, debating, canceling, or defending. The conversation extends beyond Kanye himself to broader cultural norms about forgiveness, responsibility, and the role of artists in society. Institutions, too, face this challenge. Brands, streaming platforms, and award shows must decide how to navigate the fine line between honoring artistic achievement and upholding ethical standards. Their choices reflect larger societal values and influence public discourse. Ultimately, the cultural dilemma surrounding Kanye West is a mirror reflecting our own collective struggles. It asks us to consider how we consume art, whom we choose to elevate, and what lines we draw between talent and accountability. There are no easy answers, only ongoing dialogue shaped by personal values, cultural context, and the evolving landscape of public life. Kanye's legacy, like that of many complex artists before him, will be defined not just by his creative output but by how society wrestles with this fundamental question. And in that tension lies the heart of our cultural moment, the fragile, complicated dance between reverence and responsibility. After years of relentless public scrutiny, intense controversy, and a tumultuous career marked by highs and lows, Kanye West entered a period of silence, a retreat that was as profound as it was unexpected. This silence was not just the absence of headlines or viral moments. It was a deliberate withdrawal from the relentless noise of fame and media frenzy. In the wake of his most divisive episodes, Kanye appeared to step back, pulling away from the spotlight that had once seemed inseparable from his identity. Fans and observers noticed the change immediately. The once ubiquitous presence on social media, in interviews, and public appearances grew scarce. No new music, no public campaigns, and little communication stirred curiosity and speculation about what was happening behind the scenes. This pause in activity sparked a swirl of questions. Was this silence a sign of personal reflection? A strategic retreat to rebuild? Or an uncertain moment of vulnerability, caught between the pressures of the past and the possibilities of the future? The uncertainty surrounding Kanye's next moves became a focal point for fans, critics, and industry insiders alike. Speculation ran rampant. Would he return with new creative projects? Would he reinvent himself once more? Or was this silence the beginning of a permanent exit from the cultural stage he had dominated for over 2 decades? Amid this quiet, the world was left to grapple with the complexities of Kanye's legacy and potential. The silence invited reflection, not only on his past triumphs and trials but also on the broader human experience of facing moments of pause and uncertainty. In an era where constant visibility often defines success, Kanye's withdrawal was a counterpoint, a reminder that even the most public figures need space to breathe, heal, and recalibrate. This silence, though temporary, carried weight. It represented a turning point, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with whatever chapters Kanye would choose to write next. For many, it was a moment filled with hope, the hope that beneath the quiet lay renewal, growth, and perhaps a new vision for a man who had never been content to stand still. But it also underscored the fragile nature of fame and the toll it exacts. In the silence, we see not just a retreat but a deeply human pause, a chance to regroup away from the glare of the spotlight. What the future holds remains unwritten, and in that uncertainty lies both risk and possibility. For Kanye West, the silence that followed is not an end, but a space pregnant with potential. Legacy is a complex mosaic, woven from triumphs and failures, admiration and controversy, brilliance and mistakes. For Kanye West, this mosaic is particularly fragmented, a legacy in pieces that reflects both his monumental influence and the shadows cast by his public missteps. At the heart of Kanye's legacy lies an undeniable musical impact. He redefined the soundscape of hip-hop and popular music, blending genres and pioneering production techniques that countless artists would emulate. Albums like The College Dropout shattered expectations, offering a fresh, introspective voice that contrasted sharply with prevailing trends. His bold experimentation on 808s and Heartbreak introduced new emotional depth and sonic textures. And My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is widely hailed as a masterpiece, an audacious, ambitious work that pushed creative boundaries. Beyond music, Kanye transformed the world of fashion. His Yeezy brand revolutionized sneaker culture, merging streetwear with high fashion in ways that reshaped industry standards. Collaborations with Adidas and partnerships with major brands demonstrated a business acumen matched by few artists. Kanye's influence rippled across culture. His aesthetic choices, public persona, and artistic vision inspiring millions around the globe. His role as a cultural tastemaker is undisputed, a testament to his genius and relentless drive. Yet, this remarkable influence exists alongside a very different reality: the damage to his reputation. Repeated controversies, from erratic public behavior to offensive remarks, have fractured his public image. For many, the shadow of these actions complicates or even overshadows his artistic contributions. The very traits that made him a visionary: boldness, unfiltered expression, willingness to challenge norms, also alienated fans, collaborators, and partners. His legacy is thus a paradox. Celebrated for creativity, yet burdened by controversy. This tension raises difficult questions about how history will remember Kanye West. Will his musical innovations endure, separated from the tumult of his personal life? Or will his reputation eclipse the art, coloring how future generations understand his impact? The answer is not simple. Legacy is not fixed, it evolves with time, shaped by ongoing dialogue and cultural shifts. For Kanye, this dialogue is ongoing. His story is a reminder that legacy is never purely about success or failure. It's about the complex interplay between an individual's achievements and the human imperfections that define us all. In the end, Kanye West's legacy is a mosaic, fractured but vivid, complicated but compelling. It invites us to grapple with the messy realities of genius and the cost of fame. And it leaves an indelible mark on the cultural landscape, a legacy in pieces, waiting to be understood and reinterpreted for years to come. In the quiet stillness of night, when the world slows and shadows deepen, the story of Kanye West lingers like a whispered echo, both haunting and profound. Here is a mind that once shone with blinding brilliance, a creative force that reshaped music, fashion, and culture. Yet, within that brilliance, there lies a cautionary tale: how even the most luminous minds can become trapped within the chambers of their own echo. Kanye's journey reminds us that genius is a double-edged sword. It illuminates, but it can also isolate. It inspires, but it can alienate. When a voice becomes so loud, so singular, it risks drowning out other truths, friends, perspectives, and even the self. The echoes grow louder in solitude, creating a world where reality bends to fit the contours of one's own mind. In that echo chamber, clarity fades, and the line between vision and delusion blurs. Yet, amidst this solitude, there remains a spark of hope. For within every whisper in the dark lies the possibility of rediscovery, a chance to listen beyond the echoes and find a new path forward. As we close this chapter, the question floats gently into the night, unanswered but resonant. Can a mind so brilliant, so fiercely independent, find its way back from the depths of its own reflection? It is a question not just about Kanye West, but about all who wrestle with the weight of their own genius, and the echoes it creates. And as the night deepens, that question lingers, soft, persistent, inviting us to ponder long after the story fades into silence. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the rise and fall of Kanye West. Your time and attention mean a lot. If this story resonated with you, consider liking and subscribing for more tales that dive deep beneath the surface. Until next time, rest well and good night.